operates out of the basement of, I'm married to a vicar, and so we're in the basement of the rectory. Yeah, so if you're wondering where Hope was, it's located, so specifically in the basement of the rectory, and we are in the East End of London. I love having, the reason I tell you that is I'm involved in all the stuff that you're involved in. I don't just sort of look at research, come up with a great idea, and then announce it to the world. But I'm actually living and in practice. So I have an amazing women's group on a Monday night where it's been amazing seeing people come to faith and grow in faith, which I love. 2 of my girls got baptised on Easter Sunday. 2 of the guys from Darren's boys group got baptised on Easter Sunday as well, and a couple from Alpha. So that was an amazing day. And we have always got a house with lots of people in and through it. I'm a great believer in hospitality for the gospel. I don't know if that's anyone else's practice. I think one of the key ways that food, I think, is key in the Gospels, and I think food is still really key in spreading the good news. So we have now got a large rice cooker because the last one got melted onto the cooker top during one of my women's night groups. So we then had to buy another one. I said, we just need to upscale, but I probably slightly got the measurements wrong, so it's this big. Doesn't actually fit in the cupboard, but never mind. And that's because it just means we can cook for more people more easily. And so if you're looking for one thing, I just think food, and it might be, John says people maybe don't do so much house food here. They might do more food in third places and spaces. But we particularly love just having people in and through, and the joy and delight of having people round a table, which I think Jesus did so well. And you realise it in the Gospels, don't you? How many times Jesus did food with people and did ministry with food. So that's something we love practicing where we are. And it'd be great to get to know you all and sit there. I'd love to have a coffee with all of you about what's happening in your neighbourhood, who you've got to know, because actually even around this room, there'll be really exciting stories of where God is at work. And I know that just because you look at it nationally and you realise that equates locally to lots of people. And that's really exciting. And I get the joy of travelling all around the country and seeing what people are doing all over the place, which is a joy. So Talking Jesus is what I'm here to talk about today. And this research, I don't know, did any of you hear about it in 2015? Yes. So we did it in 2015 originally, and then we redid it in 2022. We're now in 24th. We redid it in 2022. And that was so that we could begin to track. And we'll do it again. We'll do it in 5 years. We did it in 7 years then because something came along and rather blew things out of the water with a pandemic. So we couldn't do it when we planned to do it. And so we stretched it a bit and did it in 22. And we'll do it again in another 5 years' time. What are we trying to do with Talking Jesus, and why did we do it? I don't know how many evangelism days you've been to where actually people do just talk about what's happening where they are. It's not a bad place to start, is it? But if I just tell you what's happening where we are, which is maybe, everybody needs a large rice cooker. You might all go and buy a large rice cooker, but it might not work where you are, and it might not tell us enough about what's happening outside of the church. So I've been very used to, at the time of doing the first set of research, I was the National Mission Evangelism Advisor for the Church of England. And I was used to going to things and everyone brought the last anecdote that they'd experienced. The last person that they'd helped come to faith was then what they would extrapolate into a strategy. But that isn't really a big enough or a good enough way to do this. And I kept thinking, if I was head of marketing, I know we're not quite marketing, but if I was the head of marketing for Boots, on a Monday morning on my desk would arrive all the results of the weekend. I would know, I know you're all smiling because it's just so comic, isn't it? I would know exactly which stores had done what. I'd know who was picking up, who was going down. I'd know what was happening in Superdrug. I'd know what was happening in Savers. I'd know in which bits of the country what was working. I'd be able to do a market research piece of research on like what people think of the word Boots. Do I need to keep that? Has it got a link when someone sees the word Boots? Do they think, for example, family, reliable? This is a reliable place for me to get my medical needs met. Things like that I could know. But when it came to being national leader of the Church of England for mission evangelism, didn't have the foggiest idea. I was lucky if the results, if the October returns were actually processed by the following year. Or what can you do with that? So it was just like, this is crazy. And they focused on us, but I hadn't got anything that helped me understand what somebody over there was thinking outside of the church. And so that is how Talking Jesus was born. I managed to persuade a few other people that actually what we needed before we did what was called was a denominational leaders summit. So we were getting a group of denominational leaders together from right across all the different denominations. We were going to go away to this hotel for 24 hours in the Lake District, and we were going to discuss evangelism. And I was like, great, we're just going to multiply up the anecdotes by all these people and have a lovely time and then go away and do what we've always done. And so what I wanted to do was measure outside the church. So they eventually persuaded them. They said, okay. So we went to a reputable research company that would work for someone like Boots or for the government or for the NHS. And I said, this is what I'm trying to establish. And we worked out with a set of questions what might help us to understand that. And then we went and did the research. Then we brought the answers of that research to the denominational leaders. And they went, well, that can't possibly be true. So that was a good start. And the reason they said that was because the research it did not come back with the responses that they felt they knew from their anecdotes. Does that make sense? So it was this clash of what's happening in my world and what the research is actually telling me. So they said, you're going to have to do it again. So they said, go bigger, do a bigger sample. So we went back to the company and we said, we now need to go bigger. If any of you know research, you know what happens. If you did a really good weighted sample of 1,000, doesn't matter if you ask 3,000 or 30,000, you get the same results. But anyway, we had to do it to basically to get the results believed. So we did a bigger sample and we brought back the research and people began to go, maybe this could be true. And so we've done it again in 2022. And so I found it's really powerful because what it tells us is that often what we think we know, maybe we don't know. And some of the things that this research tells us is what's happening outside the church, which actually we were less in touch with than we thought. Can you think of any incidents where thought leaders in our country were out of touch with the general populace? I mean, has that ever happened? And basically, it's a very similar narrative. Thought leaders live in thought leader bubbles and they reinforce. So, often in our world now, we're even fed on Google, aren't we? We are fed what we already think. And so Google, but through the algorithms of Google, we're not necessarily getting something that is a big generalized picture. We're all living in our thought bubbles. And even an organization like the BBC that we might think is, how can I put it? Trying to be broad in its spectrum, it's not, because there's a certain group of thought leaders who are dictating what we see as news. And they are deciding, so if you're using mainstream media, what used to be called mainstream media, if you're listening to mainstream media, that again is being curated. And so everything that we hear is being curated by someone. And then we curate our own view of the world. And that is why research is so powerful. Because if you can ask questions that might get beyond that, and we can discover a bigger picture. Great. Bit of a longer intro. I know I've got a bit more time today, so than I had yesterday. So it just gives you a bit more of a chance. So that's what we did. And what we were trying to discover is what we think the harvest field is like. I always love that passage in Matthew 9, starting at verse 35, where Jesus looks out at the crowds of people and he says they are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. That was Jesus's depiction of the crowds of people at his time. And then he looks at them and he says, the harvest is... He says it's the harvesters who are few. The harvest is plentiful, the harvest is few. And I do travel everywhere, which is why sometimes I can't quite remember where I am. And I ask people what they think the harvest is like where they are. So just round your tables, have a moment to discuss, what is the harvest like where you are? you remember the parable of the sower? And I went, we might get something started. So it's amazing. Everywhere else in the country, I just like to say, it is the hardest place for the harvest. So I don't know what it's like where you are, but we're going to have a look to see whether the words of Jesus might actually still be true. It's always good, isn't it, when they are? So that's what we're looking at. So this is just to give you a sense of what we did. So it was an online survey for 10 minutes. We did it again in 2022. We did 3,115 adults. And then we had an oversample of practicing Christians. So sometimes when we're looking specifically at practicing Christians, I'll tell you most of what we're going to be discussing is the big sample, which is basically a representative sample like a soup. How can I put this? So if you were making a recipe of the UK, you'd know how many carrots to put in, how many potatoes to make it taste exactly like the UK. And that means it's by race or by gender, ethnicity, and area, so that we can even break area. I'd love to do a really big... The advantages of going bigger is that you can get more accurate details when you come into a smaller area. So maybe next time, if we can get an even wider partnership, we'll be able to go even bigger, because then we would have much greater granular detail in the survey. But I can do a little bit of north-south and east-west, and you'll see some of that when we're going through. So that's the other important thing to know is that this is a big partnership. We did it this time. So the people who helped to fund it and do this together was the Evangelical Alliance, obviously Hope, Kingsgate Community Church, Lewis Palau, CV Global, and Alpha. So we did it together because it allowed us to, have a bigger pot. And then everybody shared it, which means again that the research has gone further. So it's been a really good working partnership, and we love working in partnership. So the first question is, what is happening? The state of faith in the UK. Did any of you read the census details? And I wonder who curated your news on that. Who told you how to interpret the census? It's interesting, isn't it? Even already you can begin to see there's somebody is telling us about the census. So the big headline for the census was that we dipped under 50% of the UK who would say they're a Christian. But we already knew that because we'd done this in February, so we had a rough idea. And Muslim figure is a little low on the census. That's about 5-6%. But that's about it on how many people are Muslim in the nation. And so by far, still, the biggest group of people are people who would say they're Christian. Sometimes, perhaps, when you see things, the way things maybe are interpreted to us, it can feel sometimes like that there is an equal number of people for all the different religions in our country, but actually that just isn't the reality. So that's still not where we are. So that's quite an interesting fact, even in itself. So sometimes when you watch something, often this is one of the things that shocks people on these slides is that it's actually the Christian faith is still actually a very big part of our identity, and the other faiths are still quite small. And again, they're particularly more of an urban phenomenon. So that's what's happening. The other interesting thing on this slide is, so the older you go, you will find more people who will tick Christian, and the younger you go, you will find less people who will tick Christian. So we're about 29% of the 18 to 24-year-olds would be ticking that they're Christian. And we're going up to, I think it's 60-something, and who will tick Christian if you go 65 and above. So depending, again, on the context of where you are and the group of people that you're reaching, you will find a stronger allegiance to what I would call cultural Christianity. And as you go younger, you will find less of a allegiance to what I would call cultural Christianity. But what does that mean for mission and evangelism? So that's just a little bit of a thought. What does that actually mean for mission and evangelism? Do we have 48% of the population in church? Just checking, something might have happened, in Doncaster that I've missed. We don't, do we? So what does it mean when somebody ticks on a form that they're Christian? Yes, yeah, they could be baptised. It's interesting, isn't it? It doesn't mean that they're all the way there. So that's what's important. So when we see those, it's useful, it's interesting, it's something that they've got something that they're saying, but some of these people have never prayed, never been to church. And I know that from the data. They've never prayed and they've never been to church. It's just a thing. I am because my parents were, because I have some kind of an allegiance to this. So they're just a mission field. Does that make sense? So all we're doing is swapping our mission fields. They're still a mission field. They're not the people who actually are part, if you like, of the church family of Jesus Christ across all the different denominations in our country. They're still a mission field. They're just a different mission field. And depending on where you are and what your context profile is like, then you might have of that mission field than the none of the above. And in another part of the country, they might have more people who are none of the above because they might have so again, that'll often depend on the age demographic of the people in your neighbourhood. I don't know if you've ever looked at your parish profile on the census. So if you go into the census, it is an absolutely mind of information. So you can find out what people believe where you are. So it's great fun. You get different colours for what people have ticked. Dark blue is none of the above, and green is more of faith. And so you can tick right the way down and discover what's happening in your parish. You can even discover which streets would have a stronger allegiance to, say, being Christian, and which streets would have a stronger allegiance of none of the above. I can see where I am. It's very interesting. The rich streets are none of the above. They're not Christian, or they're atheist. And there's a real link, actually. There's some really interesting links as to who is what and who's saying what. So that's quite useful information for you to know what your area and parish is like. So have a little click on the census and you can click all the way down and find out what's happening in the streets around your church. The other really helpful thing to discover is the age bracket of your parish. So we often think in churches that the age bracket of our parish is somehow reflected by the age bracket in our church. But that is often not the case. Just want to put that out there. So it's extremely valuable to go into the census data and look at the age bracket of the people in your neighbourhood. Why? Because there may be an age bracket that's entirely missing that you could reach by being really specific, contextually specific to that group of people. You should be able to find out quite a lot about them to work out who they are, whether they're in full-time employment, what age bracket they are, what their lives are like, what their socioeconomic level is. So there's a lot of information in there that can help you to actually have a big deep. So this is quite a broad study, but what I'm saying is once you've done this, it should inspire you to go into the deep, because then we can plan with a little bit more foreknowledge. But often the people outside do not necessarily reflect the people inside. Great. So basically what this tells us is there are different mission fields and people who are starting from a different place when it comes to a journey to Jesus. And it different, therefore, they're going to respond differently to you. And then what we've been doing is working about some of those different groups. Okay, so that's a good start, where people are starting from, and that is changing with different age brackets. What's happening where you are? This is tiny, you'll never see it, I'm so sorry. In the north, which is that, you can see there's Wales to the north, you're very close on blues. You're actually quite, you fall out reasonably average. You've got about 51% of people who would say they're Christian. So about half of the population here, if you went out and say we did a survey door to door, would say that they're Christian. And very often with that group, you need to not assume that, well, you're actually not a Christian. Do you see what I mean? So you've got to start in a conversation in a different place. What does that mean to you? You know, but actually it's quite a good opener. So about half of the population around here, you've got an amazing opportunity to discover what does it mean for them to be Christian. It will give you probably more opportunity in your schools than somewhere else. Things like that, you should still have a bit more of opportunity. You can see that there's a real outlier with Northern Ireland. They're a completely different. We've been over to Northern Ireland and broken all their data out, and they're I was going to say peculiar, but peculiar in the proper sense of the word. But yeah, so you've still got, actually in the north, there is still a stronger allegiance to the Christian faith than there is in other parts of the country. And that's still going to be really useful to you. So even though they're not what we would say, we don't think they're perhaps fully in, but they think they are probably think they're connected to you, a lot of them, which is a really positive starting ground. great. And you've got, less of sort of none of the above. The only other one that's less is London, because where we are in London is a religious epicenter. So religion is a common thing. It's more common in London than anywhere else in the country that people will have a religious allegiance. Great. So you've got a good opportunity there. I don't know whether you've looked at your... this is like sort of... I've just got 2 age brackets here to reflect on, because that's quite helpful. But you've... where are we? Oh, Yorkshire and Humberside. Yeah, again, you have got a good percentage of like 18 to 24-year-olds. But you can see in different parts of the country, that's going to play out differently. So, but the real help with this would be going into the census, because this is quite big and generalised. And what I would suggest is that you go into your census. So we know, so for example, in London, we've got this 23% of all the 18 to 24-year-olds in the country live in London. So if you're working in London, you obviously need to look at that age bracket. But it would be really good for you to work out what's happening in your parish context, because that is going to be valuable for you to know who's there. But you'll find, like, if you were in East Anglia, for example, you might have more people who have, we've got patterns of we've got demographic patterns in our country of where people move to and what they do at different certain times of their life, and that can help with our plannings. Okay. All of that's really helpful, Rachel, but how many people have we actually got inside the church and in the team? So how many people out of that 40-odd%, who say they're Christian, can we actually rely on to be in the missionary team? Because this is really useful to me. Again, do you remember if I was in Boots, I'd know what my sales force was. And I used to go, I haven't got a clue. Are there 3 of us left? We live in Portsmouth. We're aged 85 and the lights are going out next week and we're going to have to close the building. And that's the end of the Christian church. And because sometimes when you read things, you do think that, or when you're scrolling through. So sometimes what is portrayed is that, there's not much hope left for the Christian church. But let's have a look. It's about 6% of the whole population who I would call are active and practicing Christians. And let me tell you how we got to that figure. This isn't something that they said. You get a higher percentage, and I know that from other questions. If I had asked people if they were a practicing Christian, I would have got a higher percentage. I'm a tougher judge. Because I wanted to find out people that I really felt could be part of the missionary team. There were 3 credentials. They had to be part of a worshipping community at least once a month. I was brought up in the Brethren. I went 3 times on a Sunday. No, 5 times on a Sunday and 3 times in the week. And that was regular. And so if that standards have slipped, you have to go at least once a month. And then I wanted the people to be praying at least weekly. You wouldn't think that was too difficult, would you? And then I wanted people to be reading their Bibles, to actually be reading and engaging with their Bibles at least weekly, reading or listening. And that takes that figure down to 6%. So 6% of the population are regularly part of a worshipping community, reading their Bibles and praying. And it's the Bible. When you put the Bible in, you really drop people. We lose a lot of people when we bring in the Bible. But it's a very useful thing, so we're going to stick with it, as we know. God speaks when we read the Bible. So that suddenly gives us a team of 6%. And you can have a look if you want them, if you love all this stuff and you want to look at how many people are worshipping once a month and how many people are reading their Bibles and how many people are praying. I've got that data as well. So that helps us. Now, what can I tell you about that 6%? Age brackets. I wonder what age bracket you think these people might be. Well, the really good news is that they are equally represented across every age demographic. So that's really good news, isn't it? The other good news is that this has not declined since 2015. So we haven't lost. And that's really important because we have an ageing population and people are dying and going to, or being promoted to glory. We have got enough people coming in to counterbalance that. And we've done that over 7 years. You're now looking at me and going, are you sure? So 2 really important factors. This is across every denomination. So it's not just the Church of England, it's all of us together. And that's quite an important point. And we have as many people who are young as we have old. We have an aging demographic. So what I had to work out was the percentage of their percentage of the population. Does that make sense? Because we are aging, so we have less people. There are less people in those age brackets than that in the younger age brackets, because the whole population is aging. But they are equally represented in the church. So that's good news, isn't it? So where we see written, we've just dropped under 50% of Christians. The church is in decline. The actual church, i.e. the people that we know we can count on and rely on, we are not in decline. And we haven't been so that's 7 years. And we'll do it again in another 5 years' time. But it's actually quite exciting news for the church. Great. But we have got this huge chunk of 42% of what I call non-practicing Christians. So there's a big task still of mission amongst them. One of the reasons for this, I don't know why this slide is a bit fuzzy, but it is the actual gift of the ethnic church. And that may not come to play quite so much here. I don't know quite what your ethnic breakdown is. So again, looking into your census data. So 83%, once you come out of London, then 83% of the rest of the UK we're still a very white country. But if you look at the gift that we have received with the gift of the non-white ethnic church, which has been an incredible gift, they have been really good at discipling their young people. And so for example, in London, we're seeing that on a massive scale. Part of that really good news story about the younger generations is to do with the gift of the non-white ethnic church into our midst. And so we need to embrace them, work with them, and learn some of the things that they are really good at that we have not been so good at. And then we're beginning to see that come into play as part of the makeup of the church in the UK. Great. How do people describe Jesus? This is good. We're doing a little bit of a jump. So we're going back out now, big, wide, in the whole population. About 20% of the population would think that Jesus is God in human form among people in the first century. That's not bad, is it? It's a good start. So if you're having a cup of tea with someone, that wouldn't be bad. But look at the prophet, spiritual leader, not God. That's way bigger than the Muslim population. That's about 5-6% of the population. 33% of the population are saying that they think that Jesus is a prophet or a spiritual leader. Have a great cup of tea with one of them, can't you? Or a pint down the pub. I mean, have you ever heard anything about what this spiritual leader says? Would you be interested to read about this prophet in more detail? Oh, yeah, actually, I've never really looked into it. I had a great chat. I like trains because I can talk to people. And I had a great chat on a train with a young guy, and he hadn't ever. We got to that point. He said, "You know what? I should do that." I said, "You should do that before you decide yes or no. Why don't you examine the claims of this spiritual leader?" Oh yeah, no, that's good. So I gave him one of our little cards that takes you through to the gospel. And he's like, "Yeah, no, I should do that," because actually that's a fair point, isn't it? If you think they're a spiritual leader, have you actually examined what that spiritual leader said for themselves? It's you should do that once in your life. And yeah, that's a good idea. So they're a good group. I'd like a cup of tea with them. And what we're trying to say is they're nearer us. They're not out there like this. I sometimes think that we think everybody outside of our church is over there in the atheist category and we've got to try and reach them. But actually, this group of people are nearer us than we would imagine. Great. Do they think Jesus is a real human being? Interesting. About 54% think he's a real human being. The others probably think he's Gandalf. And so we've got a job to do here of helping people to understand that Jesus actually lived and walked on earth. So this is something, I don't know if you do schools work, talking about the historicity of Jesus. Even an atheist can think that he is a historical figure. So we need to re-engage and help people to understand that he's a real human being. And then people think about Jesus. This would be classic. So if I'm trying to help people find and meet Jesus, when I say Jesus to somebody, are they going to be like, are they going to lean away from me or are they going to lean towards me? What do they think? What does Jesus help with people? And I love it. Jesus comes out really well. Right. He comes out as a spiritual, peaceful, loving, wise leader. Do we need any of those? Have we got a shortage of loving, peaceful, spiritual, wise leaders? I mean, what a great sales pitch. We don't have to sell Jesus. He's doing a very good job all by himself, but we are part of the team. And this makes me realise that some of those people who tick Christian, who live down the street, think Jesus is a spiritual leader or a prophet, also think he's a great spiritual, wise leader. It's just they've never stopped, perhaps, to actually read anything he said or engage with it. But they're a lot closer than you think. They're a lot closer than you think. And they have a positive view of Jesus. Okay, I now want you to chat around your tables about, have you just had Easter? I know you have. It's a silly question. We're all still a bit tired from Easter. We did so much for Easter. It was just like this massive thing of like, yeah, we loved it, but it was really big. I took a street team out on the Saturday. We had services on the Thursday, services on the Friday. I took a street team out all of Saturday, and then on Sunday we had baptisms. But I don't know how we got 50 people, but we had 50 people. We opened up lots of different homes in our church for people to go, and somehow or other we got all of the overflows. So other people had 12 people for lunch, but we had 50. That was quite chaotic. And it just went on and on. But it was amazing. Easter was amazing. How many people in the UK believe in the resurrection? Have a little chat around your table. If you already know the figure because you were there last night, you're just going to have to keep quiet. It's 16% who believe word for word, and it is 29% who still say they believe, but that some content shouldn't be taken literally. So 45% of the population were willing to tick a box saying, I believe in the resurrection. And you're like, no, Rachel. This was the stat that nobody believed when we took it originally. We had 44% in 2015, and absolutely everyone went, there is something kooky in your research. You cannot have 44% of the population believing in the resurrection. And it's currently 45% of the population. And they're like, this just can't be true, Rachel. I remember them. They were like, no. Go and do your research again. Went and did the research again, same result. The other people who did the research were the BBC. In 2017, they decided that they wanted a headline for Easter Sunday, and it was going to read, more people believe in reincarnation than resurrection, no longer Christian Britain. That's what they were going for. And so they went to Savanta Comres and said, can you help us with a poll? What do you have? What questions? This was one of the questions that they asked. They got the same result. They got 44% of the population believed in the resurrection. So what they looked at was, can you see the I do not believe? 41%. Can you believe only 41% of the population ticked I do not believe in the resurrection? Only 41% of the population ticked I do not believe in the resurrection. And then they looked at how many of those people also ticked Christian. And that crossover was about, I think it was about 13 or 18, I can't remember, 13%. So their headline in 2017 for us all on Easter Sunday was 13% of Christians don't believe in the resurrection. Has the church failed on teaching one of the major tenets of the Christian faith? And how encouraging was that? We all just, what happens is we read that on Easter Sunday and we wither a bit. And I'm like, you have missed the point. 44, it was then 44, it's now 45. 44% of the population believe in the resurrection. Isn't that the point? That would have encouraged us, wouldn't it? So I went on all the local radio stations, and in those days you sat in a booth. Now you sit at home on Zoom. But I sat in a booth, and I went round all the different BBC local radio stations as they said, Rachel, has the church failed because 13% of the Christians don't believe? I said, oh, that's interesting, but did you know that 44% of the UK population believe in the resurrection of Jesus? And they went, where did you get that from, is what they said. I said, oh, your research. And they went, no, that can't be true. I said, well, if that can't be true, then the whole of your research can't be true. I said, and this is what they literally, none of my friends believe in the resurrection. Bubble. Bubble. Well, not a surprise, really. I can even guess your postcodes. And the pub that you drink in, and that you basically reinforce your bubble. But you're not in tune with the majority of the British public who do believe in the resurrection. Now, should that not give us confidence on an enormous scale that we can do this? But what happens is we connected almost by an earpiece, we've got a little earpiece in, and what we're receiving most of the time, the people who are telling us things, they're not that keen. I think they're just beginning to change. Are just beginning to notice a wind of change in the media and how they're reporting on us. But up till recently, they weren't trying to grow the Church of Jesus Christ. That was not their job. And they weren't interested. And so everything will just wither us a little bit more. And then we lose a bit more of our confidence. And then we think, oh dear, we're doing a really poor job because 13% of the Christians don't even believe in the resurrection. And it's just such a disaster. Whereas actually, this tells you what opportunity we've got. It's huge. So if you walk down any street and you start chatting to people or knock on the doors from the local church and invite them to your Easter services, why don't you come out and find out about the resurrection? There's a good chunk of them who's going to be interested. A really big group of them who's going to be interested. It doesn't matter if 41% say no. We'd be thrilled if 45% rocked up, wouldn't we? So we've been looking at that, and I've done something called Alive this year. It was a bit late on the film series, but we have begun to spread it out. We still had a spread of churches doing it across the nation, and we'd love for more to do it next year. This is our newspaper. I gave out 400 of these newspapers on Easter Saturday in the streets. You can sort of have a look at it and then pass it back as you go. And it's a film series on the resurrection encounters of Jesus. And because obviously we've put one time, you can have all the posters and all of the flyers. You can choose whether you have a person on them or you don't. So if it doesn't fit your context, you can take the person off. Which is just because we know that different contexts maybe need a different approach. So we produced these. These are now 10p. I mean, they were 15p, cheaper than a cream egg, to help people find out about Jesus. And they've got the testimonies of people from the film series in them. And then they've got some evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Great talking point. I had a lovely email in my inbox. Was it yesterday? From someone who took one to her dad in hospital who laughed at the title. Maybe not subtle, but anyway. But then it became a talking point in the ward. And so he was able to pass them. I mean, people haven't got much to do. They're sitting there in their beds in the ward. So the newspaper has travelled around the ward and he's been able to have cracking conversations with the people in his hospital ward because he had an opener for a conversation. Lots of what we do in Hope is conversation openers, because it can get a conversation going. So lots of people in his ward have had a conversation about whether or not they're alive. I don't know what the doctors and nurses think, but it's a film series. We sprayed our streets. We chalk sprayed our streets. You can get permission from the council to do that. Do get permission beforehand or you can get a fine. But we chalk sprayed our streets with Am I Alive? We gave out the newspapers. We went big for Easter. And I just wonder if we could go really big together. So you could look at Doncaster and you could think, where are our biggest streets in Doncaster? How can we go huge for Easter? What do we need to do together and actually to declare the resurrection? Now, I know we often do a walk of silent witness, but that might not necessarily always express the power of the resurrection available to people to change their lives. So that's why we went for spraying the streets, giving out the newspapers, sense of presence. At Peterborough, they did their buses and their bus stops as well, all had Am I Alive on. And so that they could get that news out as far as wide. And then, the banners can all match. So if you do it as a group of churches, everybody can be bannered up and look the same. Does that make sense? So what you're doing is making a collective noise about the resurrection of Jesus. And we're trying specifically. So everything we do is we looked at the research and went, Easter. We need to go big. Because we need to help that 29% wobble factor people fully understand and comprehend the power of the resurrection for them. This isn't just a thing of, I think a lot of those people, it's a maybe and a hope for something when I die, vaguely. That's kind of probably where they are. And we have got something concrete and solid now. So we're running it in my life group, and one of my friends is coming. That's really exciting. But even in my life group amongst the Christians, one of them hadn't quite fully comprehended the physical resurrection for us as a promise. And she said, "What, we'll recognize each other?" I'm like, yes. The disciples recognized Jesus. He is the first type of the resurrected. And our invitation is that we will be like him. We will be as fully resurrected and alive as the resurrected Jesus. We will be recognizable. That is the promise here. And she's like looking at me, and I'm like, wow, it's so interesting, isn't it? We found that the Alive series is even going to help people in churches to fully comprehend the exciting, extraordinary offer of eternity that Jesus Christ has broken through death and has risen again. I mean, it's the most exciting news. And there's a whole pile of people we know, therefore, with a vague hope of something. Let's give them something solid, that assurance. It's so extraordinary, really, isn't it, what we've got? What we have is so amazing. We have a promise. And the people who come to Youth, they've got a vague hope, haven't they, of something. We have to help them. And we have to get bolder. And so if we can do it together, then it really helps. What can you do together? You've got loads of planning time now for next Easter. How can you make sure that everybody who's asking that question or has got some vague belief gets the opportunity to find the full truth of Jesus? So we're really excited about that. If you go to thealiveseries.com, you can see the whole film series. And there was a church as well that we're working with he invited people he made it as big invitationally as he did Christmas. Does that make sense? You know, at Christmas we say, invite your friend, invite your friend, invite your friend. But everyone says, a lot of people, I don't know, people do tend to go away for Easter holidays. So we're like, please stay with us for Easter, then go on holiday. Just do Easter with us, then you can go on holiday. So people are starting the series. A lot of people are starting it after the Easter holidays. But invite everyone for Easter. Make it as big. Make sure all your streets get invited. Everybody gets invited to the Easter party, because a lot of them would love an invite. And with 51% of your area saying they're Christian, it is not going to be difficult to invite them to Easter and then invite them back. So that was the joy of what he did. So they came one week. Well, it's Easter. We've just met Mary who encountered Jesus, but next week it's still Easter. Well, it is liturgically, isn't it? It's still Easter. We're still celebrating. We're in feast season, and we're going to meet the next person who encountered Jesus. And that is Cleopas and it probably his wife. So why don't you come along? We're going to look at hope. We've looked at love. We're going to look at, hey, and you know what? Next week, it's still Easter. Come back. We're still celebrating. You're still invited. We'd love to see you. People do need to know that they're invited. I think we often assume that they know, but they don't. Please come back. We are really welcome. Please come back. We're going to do the next encounter. We're going to look at the next person who encountered Jesus, the risen Jesus, and we're going to look at Thomas. Great. Next week we're still doing Easter, and you're still welcome, and we'd love to see you. Please come back. And as we're going to do the next resurrection encounter, we're going to look at Peter, and we're going to look at freedom and forgiveness. Great. Next week we're still doing it. You get it, don't you? By the end of that, people have got into quite a habit of being part of your church. And so what they did is they then called people to make a decision for Jesus, and they had a far bigger uptake of people who decided to make a commitment and stay with their church. So we're like, great, you've kind of trialed it. We'll upscale it. We'll do it all together. And we came up with Alive. So we've got a whole year's planning now. So that's good. Great. Okay. Good. You're all on side for Easter. Those outside the church. If you were, have you ever played hide and seek with a 3-year-old? And you have to be really obvious, don't you? So if you're hiding here, you sort of put your leg out so they can find you. And have you ever noticed that they go back to the same place? So if you hide behind the sofa, the next time they go back to behind the sofa because human beings are a bit like this, really. We don't change as we get older. And so in a way, I feel like sometimes with Jesus, we want people to find Jesus, but actually we entirely hide him. And we need to make it as obvious as possible for people to find Jesus, don't we? So one of the things we thought we'd ask is, where would they look? Where would they look? Where would the average person go to find out more about the Christian faith if they were interested? Have a conversation around your table. Where would the average person go? You're going to come up with some very obvious answers, I'm sure. Where would you look if you wanted to find out about the weather today? Where would you look if you wanted to find out about a holiday resort? If you wanted to know about, a restaurant. Yeah, great. Okay, where would somebody look if they wanted to find out about the Christian faith? Where do we need to be if we want to help them to find out about the Christian faith? Great. So well done. Really simple. So, if we want people to find Jesus, we have to put it where they're going to look. And they are going to look on Google. So you need a really good, if you're a local church, you need an absolutely cracking website. And if you don't know how to do that, get a 14-year-old to help you. And I'm sure there's people in the diocese to help you, but you really do need to have a cracking website. It is your best thing. You need to stay online. If you're online in the pandemic, don't give up going online. You'll be like, oh, who's watching? But having your church on Facebook, so that people can see what you do and who you are, is going to be really helpful. It just means that people can have a look. They can find you. They won't find you. So if that's where they're going to look. So be in the most obvious place. It just sounds so obvious now that we're thinking about it, doesn't it? But sometimes we've missed that opportunity. YouTube, if you want to reach anyone under the age of 24, you'll need to be on YouTube. It's just how it is. They don't look on Google. They don't want to read how to change a plug. They want to watch somebody do it. So again, you just have to be a presence on YouTube doing something. I know a great church that did little filmed testimonies of people in the church and said, oh, this is Barry, and Barry wants to tell you about this that happened in his life and how he found Jesus, and then Maureen, and then someone else. And they put that up on their website, and people came to the church to find Barry. So they literally rocked up saying, oh, hello. Yeah, no, what have you? Oh, I'm just looking for Barry. And people are like, what? Who? Who's Barry? On your website? Oh, Barry. But they came to find the people that they'd seen because they wanted to have a conversation with them about what they'd shared. It's just Barry's story was a bit like my story, and so I wanted to find out about Barry. So making yourselves sort of, putting ourselves up on that can be really good because people can find you. So basically, the internet is our friend, and we need to use it. And I'm not very good, so find somebody who is. We live in community, so I just hand things over to 20-somethings because I'm not a digital native. But find the digital natives because they live and breathe it. It's kind of attached, isn't it? So let's make use of their addiction. But let's make use of it because it's where they are. The other good thing you'll be pleased to know, though, is that 22% said going to a local church. Sure. And have you got anything to do with a local church? Yay, great. So going to a local church. Love it. People know that. And you know what? I do feel that is one of the big advantages of the Church of England. The buildings look like what people perceive a church to be. If 51% of your neighbourhood has ticked that they're Christian, they'll be looking for something that looked like some level of familiarity, maybe something they went to for childhood, something that they went to for a baptism. You will not feel as foreign. Or does that make sense? We've got a girl, our student pastor said, so she hasn't worked in a building like this before. She's just like, I really need to talk to you about our building. I'm like, okay. She said, it's like people come. I'm like, yes. I said, the building is one of our best evangelists. It's one of our best evangelists. It's a beautiful building. It's iconic. The world comes to the building. And so they just end up drifting into our services because they've come to the building. And then they go, oh, what's going on in here? So it's like, yes. And whilst we have that advantage, shouldn't we be using it? This is then the next thing. Look at that. Reading the Bible. You've got to love it, haven't you? I love it. I've become Mrs. Mad Bible Woman. Reading the Bible. I read the Bible every day. I hope you do. But what happens when we read the Bible? Yeah. What happens when a non-Christian reads the Bible? I was like, oh, good. I remember when I first saw it, I felt like, sometimes we're looking for a trick to help people meet Jesus. We don't need a trick. This is the best one we've got. And the only thing we discovered when we did more research was that for a younger generation who actually are really interested in the Bible, the design was the one thing that mattered. Because for them, it's a language. So again, it's like being a missionary. Don't critique the culture. You have to go with the culture to reach people in the culture. You can then disciple them back to lose some of their culture. So there's massive discipleship issues that we might have around some of the things, like a mobile phone. But actually, when you're being missionary into a culture, you have to learn and live in the culture sufficiently to communicate in the culture. And then you have a discipleship task that then takes the challenges of that culture and helps people realize where there are huge weaknesses. Does that make sense? But sometimes as a Christian church, we stand outside of that culture and say, well, we're not doing that because, that's not, once they don't like the design, well, they should just get over it. Well, they're not going to. So as a missionary, we need to do you see? So that's, if we're going to reach a culture, we have to understand enough of it and be enough of flowing in it for them to be able to read the culture. So that's why this looks beautiful. And they would love to have that on their coffee table. We have a digital version as well. So we spent a lot of time with Biblica creating these. And one lady, lovely lady, so as far as she could get for the church building and the Bible, what they did is they had them in the porch. So she simply, I call it low bar. Anyone got a church porch that's open, even if your building isn't? So they put these in the porch because the building wasn't open. And then she had a little display, had them up. Please take one if you're interested to read in the life of Jesus. Somebody came and took one and came back to church the following week. And they were all a bit stunned and said, well, I've read about this man, Jesus, and I've come to find out more. So if you can't open the building, open the porch. And even if you can't talk to someone, we could put these. I think we could put them everywhere where people might fall over them. Let them just fall over it till they discover the word. Do you see what I mean? In the food bank, in the parent and toddler group, in the cafe, wherever at all possible, please make sure that somebody can find something of the historicity, the life events of Jesus Christ, the eyewitness accounts of Jesus Christ, so that they can find it. And the other thing we discovered was they wanted to be able to read it easily. So it's NIRV. So it's the reader's version of the NIV because it's reading age 9 to 10. So do have a look at those. Great. So that is where people would find us if they were looking for the Christian faith. One more slide and we're going to have coffee break. Where would non-practicing Christians go? So do you remember that was the non-Christians? That's where the non-Christians would go. But there's also this huge group of non-practicing Christians, of which you've got a big chunk of those around you, and they would overwhelmingly go to a local church because they've got a connection to you. Do you see? They've got a cultural connection to you. So if they were looking for more about the Christian faith, they will come to you. And now, how exciting is that? And actually, with a bit of a campaign and a bit of an invite and a bit of a push, there is a really good chance that they will come to find out more. And then again, reading the Bible. So they've still got Google and YouTube, but you can see, or they talk to, you're going to hear a lot about bishops' missions and things later. 24% would go to talk to a Christian leader in the community. So, that, I don't know if you remember those. Did you ever do vicar in the pub nights? But actually, they'd be pleased to come and ask the vicar questions or the bishop questions in the pub. Great. I remember doing that with a Northern mission once and standing in a pub. And this chap said, well, if you're willing to come and stand here in the pub, then yeah, I'm willing to talk. I'm willing to talk faith with you. You're in my pub. I'm willing to have that conversation. That they'd never have come. And then one of them said, oh, do you know what? Actually, he had a really deep conversation because his friend's mother had just died and they'd all been to a funeral. Great. I'll stand there, have a gin and tonic. You have a pint. So we'll have a classic conversation in the pub. So that is something that people will do. And so because you've got a reasonable, that you need to think of both of those groups of people. Do you see the non-Christians further away, but a lot of your community is closer to you than you ever dared dream or imagine.